your capstone for winter 17, we're going to be talking about your quality assurance plan. And just to put you on track here, we are entering the first week of February, and your quality assurance plan is something that you need to start thinking about as you are finalizing what product you're going to be working on. Now, again, just to remind you, quality in many organizations is integrated into food safety management. But for the purposes of this program, I want to be delineating food safety separate from quality. So again, what does this mean? We're looking at parameters that if they were not in tolerance, it's not going to cause a recall. So maybe you burnt something, or maybe you don't have quite enough chocolate chips in your chocolate chip muffin. Fair enough, but you do not need to cause a recall because of that. Now, as we all know, I love my lovely banana muffins here, and so let's bring them back here. Here's my banana chocolate chip muffins that I love talking about for my example capstone. So again, what would be some good quality parameters on these muffins? Now let's say that muffin in the box there is my ideal muffin. So thinking about this, banana chocolate chip muffins. Oh, this one's a little bit pale, this one's a bit burnt. So color could be an important parameter. Size and volume. Maybe my muffin was indeed, oh, I've got that muffin there and I've got that muffin there. Oh. If I had this sort of size differential between my muffins coming out of the line, I'd have some problems. I'm giving away too much here. I'm not going to meet my weight tolerance. It's going to look completely unbalanced in a package. Distribution of chocolate chips. Oh, wait a second. If I got that muffin and I'm buying a chocolate chip muffin, I feel like I'm being gypped here because, like, seriously, I don't get enough chocolate chips. And sensory attributes. If it's a banana chocolate chip muffin, you would expect a flavor typical of a banana chocolate chip muffin. Perhaps I need some texture attributes. Maybe I want it to be cakey and light. Maybe I want it to be dense because it's full of whole grains and good stuff. Maybe I want the top to be crispy but the bottom cakey. So I've got a few different quality parameters. These are not food safety parameters, they're quality parameters. So let's remind ourselves, what do we need for this assignment? So if I had a process flow chart, where could I be evaluating the quality of this? So, for example, going back to our muffins here, color, obviously this is at the end of the bake step, size and volume at the end of the bake step, weight at the end of the bake step, distribution of chocolate chips, that could be at the batter step or at the bake step, sensory attributes at the bake step, texture, end of the bake step. So in many cases, quality can be evaluated earlier on. In other cases, it remains at the end of your process. The challenge being that if you have a deviation and you need to bring your product back into quality parameter, you may need to readdress this. So for example, distribution of chocolate chips, I could do this at the batter step. I could be subsampling my batter prior to baking to make sure that the chocolate chip distribution is appropriate. I could do a bake-off of my batter in a very small batch prior to bake-off to make sure that the sensory attributes are on. But I won't be surprised if for many of you, these are terminal step quality attributes. So going back here, overlay your process flowchart with the points at which you would evaluate quality. Why does this matter? Well, in certain programs like SQF Level 3, you would be integrating your quality assurance points into your process flow. But it's important just to be noting where in the process you are going to be measuring quality. Last but not least, describe each of your points for your product in a written summary. So I'm looking for a minimum of 3 quality points. So 15 marks, 5 per quality point, and there's 5 things that I want to see here. Identify it as relates to the production flowchart, as we mentioned up before. Describe briefly how you would measure it, and are there any relevant regulatory or industry standards to be met. If your product meets a standard of identity, you may be required to have some quality assurance points that are not food safety related, such as if you were making ice cream, the amount of overrun, how much air you've whipped into the ice cream, is a quality assurance point, and it is relevant to an industry standard and regulatory standard. If I was making ketchup, the coloration and the amount of flow is relevant to a regulatory standard. If I was making grape juice, I am required to meet a minimum regulatory standard for Brix value. And again, these are not food safety issues, these are simply quality parameters. So most of you do not have standardized products, but if there is a relevant standard, do make sure you've integrated it in. Let me just check my time. Oh, I'm at 5 minutes. So, briefly describe how I'd measure it. So if I go back here and go back to my muffins, oh, wrong document. If I'm going to measure color, I could do it as simply as having a paint chip laminated in the quality assurance lab, where I can compare the color of a random sample of muffins. Or I could be using the Konica Minolta colorimeter or comparable light meter. Size or volume, this one's cool for muffins. In many cases, in the old school bakeries, they'd stick that muffin into a beaker of a known volume and then pour mustard or canola seeds on top. And so you're measuring the displacement volume, the amount of air in that beaker would be taken up by canola seed. Then carefully dump the canola or mustard seed into a graduated cylinder and measure the volume that has been displaced. So if we know the volume of the beaker and we know the volume of canola seed, we can then figure out the volume of our muffin. Weight, if you don't know how to measure weight by now, I'll shake you by the shoulders, pat you on the back and say, oh man, oh man, oh man. Distribution of chocolate chips, this is a fun one. But again, if I looked at that muffin and I saw, I don't see any chocolate chips on it, it could be as simple as doing a score count on the top of your muffin, or in a certain volume of muffin batter, I need to see so many chocolate chips. Maybe I need to have 30 chocolate chips on the top of my muffin, something to that extent, and an acceptable range between 25 to 35 being acceptable. Sensory attributes, again, we haven't done quantitative determination analysis, but you could have a trained panel saying, does our muffin meet our standard? Day-to-day variations, and doing difference testing, for example, or quantitative determination analysis to say, is the texture appropriate? Is the banana flavor appropriate? Is the chocolate flavor appropriate? Is the cakiness appropriate? And so on. Texture could be measured quantitatively using a texture meter, or it could be measured qualitatively by having a sensory panel. If necessary, do put limits out there. So you may, especially in quantitative measures, again, things that you are measuring with numbers, you may say, here's an acceptable number for this. Last but not least, you want to have a deviation management strategy for each quality control point. And similar to a HACCP, just watching the time here, I've got 1 minute, you want to make sure that if your product is not to tolerance, what are you going to do with it? If my color is off, this one is overcooked, and this would be rejected. If it's under, I could be returning it to cook longer. If I have size volume issues, if I have too large or too small, I would need to go back to my portioning equipment and make sure that it is portioning appropriately. Same with the weight. Go back to the portioning equipment and make sure it's portioning appropriately. Distribution of chocolate chips, make sure that the formulation sheet has been followed and the right amount of chocolate chips have been put in, and that the batter viscosity is appropriate, so that all the chocolate chips aren't sinking to the bottom of the mixer. Sensory attributes, again, this one's a little more tricky to deal with, but are we following the formulation, and are we cooking things out correctly? And texture, same deal. If need be, it could go back for a bit more cooking or following formulation appropriately. Thanks. Talk to you soon. Bye.